Tell me if this story sounds familiar. So you're told that an EQ pedal is super useful. So you grab one for your board, you sit down, set it up, start tinkering with the settings, only to realize that it's basically doing the same thing as the EQ section on your amp or any of your pedals with a tone knob. I mean, sure, it's got a few more bands of EQ and you can get more particular with it, but ultimately it's not revolutionizing your tone. So you take it off the board, freeing up a slot for something a little more sexy like a Walrus Audio Fable Granular Soundscape Generator Delay Pedal, or a Swollen Pickle. The thing is, an EQ pedal is a really helpful tool to create great tones, but most guitarists are using them the wrong way. Now, in the course of running killer guitar rigs, I've had literally hundreds of pedals cross my desk. And while maybe 5 years ago I was one of those players who shied away from EQ pedals because I honestly didn't really get them, I've come to realize that it can be one of the most useful tools you can have in your chain, especially when you're trying to tweak your tone to fit perfectly into a song. So let's dive into some ways to actually use an EQ pedal besides just changing your EQ. So the first way to use an EQ that you might not have thought about is to use it like a filter. See, a lot of times in the studio, producers will use filter plugins on a guitar part, like in a quiet verse, to reduce the bigness of the guitar a little bit, and then bypass the filters when the chorus comes around, going back to the guitar's original full tone, basically working the dynamics on the basis that for something to feel big, something else has to feel small. And you can do exactly the same thing with an EQ pedal. This is especially helpful if you're in a one guitar band or a group that doesn't use backing tracks, because it's hard to make the most impactful moments feel big if your bassline tone is already filling a lot of space. So instead of pushing for bigger and bigger, you can use an EQ pedal to dial in something smaller and then expand from there. Now, a good starting point would be boosting your low frequencies, cutting some of the mids, and all of the highs. By the way, we're using the Empress Effects ParaEQ, which they sent us about a year ago and has been kind of the go-to EQ pedal here in the studio. You can use any EQ pedal to get the same effect. So the next reason to use an EQ pedal is really going to help our multi-genre players. Now, if you're in a band that plays a wide variety of styles of songs, having an EQ pedal on your board will give you a one-button option to totally flip your tone from something bright and poppy to something warm and jazzy, with more precision than just rolling off your tone knob. The real tip here is that you can use your EQ pedal as a tone selector switch. See, a lot of people think of it as like an always-on kind of pedal, but using it to build a totally unique tone for specific songs is a much more utilitarian way to use these kinds of pedals. If you just turn your EQ on, dial in a tone you like in combination with your amp's EQ, then it's easy to just shrug and say, yeah, that sounds fine. But if you dial in your amp's EQ settings for your main tone first, and then switch on your EQ pedal and use that to dial in a second tone that's like a great contrast to your main tone, it'll really unlock a lot of different tonal options for the same amount of gear. By the way, one thing you should be aware of if you're using like a graphic EQ pedal live is that the slots that are cut out for the sliders can be a magnet for like dust, dirt, sweat, whatever. So if you're planning on gigging with a pedal like that, it can be worthwhile to DIY a little cover to protect it. That's one thing about the Empress ParaEQ that I like. With the more standard knobs, you do lose like the graphic EQ style that can be easy to visualize, but you gain the peace of mind that nothing is going to work its way into your pedal during gigs. Okay, so the next EQ technique is for all you edge of breakup players. If you love pushing your amp's gain right into that sweet spot where you can really affect the tone with the dynamics of your playing, an EQ pedal lets you push that into just past the edge of breakup when you want just a little bit more dirt. Now, this is different from a transparent overdrive. Honestly, it's more like an ultra transparent overdrive. You can achieve the same thing with your volume knob, but that has three slight problems. So for one, it's annoying to fiddle with the volume knob while also playing with your hands. So moving that job to your feet is a nice way to make things easier on yourself. Two, the volume knob doesn't give you quite as much control. If you want to push past the edge of breakup by emphasizing just the bright highs, or get a bigger sound without breaking up by boosting just the lows, you can do that with an EQ pedal. And three, it can be tough to turn your volume knob up and down the right amounts between sections, so you end up with inconsistent volume from section to section. Now, the ParaEQ has a boost foot switch that you can use to push the overall volume up, but on any EQ pedal, raising the frequency will also raise the volume, so it's something you can do with any EQ pedal in one way or another. If you gig a lot, you may have noticed that it's tricky to switch guitars from song to song. Your humbucker guitars are probably louder and beefier, so when you switch to a single coil guitar, your tone kind of thins out to a ridiculous level. One thing that an EQ pedal is great for is compensating for the difference in volume and tone between two guitars. If you're gigging and you like using a Les Paul for one song and a Strat for another, an EQ pedal can bridge the gap between the two so your tone doesn't fall apart after the switch. Just set up the amp for the guitar that you use the most, and then switch to your second guitar, activate your EQ, dial it in until you're happy with the volume and tone, and now you've got your signal chain set up for switching between humbuckers and single coils. In general, you'll want to push the volume and bass up a touch when you switch to a single coil guitar, or if you're switching to a humbucker, pull out a little of the low end. The goal here isn't to make your two guitars sound like each other, because that would kind of defeat the whole purpose of the switch. It's more so about keeping your overall volume the same and making sure your pedal settings sound good for both guitars. Like say if you dial in a distortion pedal for one guitar and then you switch to the other, you'll get wildly different results. Using an EQ pedal can compensate for those differences so you don't spend the entire song hunched over trying to fix your jacked up distortion pedal settings. One other super handy use for an EQ pedal is to lop off some of the low end on hollow body guitars like this one. The same way that a proper live sound engineer will put like a high pass filter on the vocals to avoid feedback coming from the wedges, a wise guitarist will high pass their feedback prone guitars, namely one of these guys. So this is something that acoustic players are already clued into. It's why you'll see EQ settings on higher end acoustic guitars. As soon as they hear a touch of feedback, they can just reach down and dial it back without having to rely on the sound guy, who's probably busy watching children's TV on his phone. If you're playing a hollow body, it's not really a set it at home and forget it, since every PA and room is different. So ideally you want to first dial in at sound check and then just leave it on during the show. So the next one on the list should come as no surprise to any regular viewers of the channel, but as a 90s metal guy, I would be remiss if I left out the most important reason to use an EQ pedal. Scooping the mids. Now that you've watched this video, go dig that EQ pedal out of the closet and get it set up. Or if you don't have one, check out the link in the description to get one from Sweetwater. They didn't sponsor this video or anything, but anytime you buy gear using our links, it helps the channel and it keeps our local Taco Bell open. Also, if you want even more techniques for dialing in your perfect tone live, watch this video next.